Commander Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship and looked around at the crystal buildings that stretched up toward the purple sky. The Zephyrian homeworld was nothing like Earth. Everything here looked clean and perfect, like someone had built a city inside a giant jewel. The air smelled sweet and the gravity felt lighter than home. Jake had been in the military for 15 years, but he had never seen anything quite like this place. Behind him walked Lieutenant Kate Sullivan, Sergeant Danny Rodriguez, and Corporal Alex Bennett. They were all carrying heavy bags filled with training equipment from Earth. The bags looked rough and worn compared to everything else on this world. Jake could see the Zephyrian people watching them with curious eyes. The aliens were tall and thin with skin that looked like it was made of living crystal. They moved in a way that reminded Jake of dancers. A group of Zephyrians approached them. The one in front was wearing robes that seemed to change color as he moved. He was taller than the others and carried himself like someone important. Jake guessed this must be their host. "Welcome to our world, humans," the alien said in perfect English. His voice sounded like wind chimes. "I am High Instructor Veltar Quickwind. We are honored to have you visit our Combat Institute." Jake stepped forward and offered his hand. Veltar looked at it for a moment before carefully shaking it. The alien's hand felt cool and smooth. "Thank you for having us," Jake said. "We're excited to share our training methods with your students." Veltar smiled, which looked strange on his crystal face. "Your species has such an interesting approach to conflict resolution. We have studied your history and find it quite fascinating how you have survived on such a dangerous world." Kate raised an eyebrow. She had read the files about Zephyrian society during the long trip here. These people had not fought a real war in over 300 years. Their idea of combat was more like a sport with very strict rules. Nobody was supposed to get hurt, and the fighting stopped as soon as someone scored points. "We are eager to learn about your training methods," Veltar continued. "Our students have heard many stories about human warriors. They think your people must use very advanced technology to be so effective in battle." Danny and Alex exchanged glances. They both knew that humans did not rely on fancy gadgets in combat. Most of their training was about pushing the human body and mind to their limits. Jake wondered how these peaceful aliens would react when they saw what humans considered normal. Veltar led them through the crystal streets toward the Combat Institute. The building was beautiful, but Jake noticed something missing. There were no scars on the walls, no dents or scratches that showed where real fighting had happened. Everything looked like it had been built yesterday. "Tell me about your students," Jake said as they walked. "They are the finest young warriors of our generation," Veltar replied with pride. "They have mastered all 17 forms of ceremonial combat. They can perform the dance of blades without making a single mistake. Some can even fight for 3 hours without breaking a sweat." Jake nodded, but inside he was thinking about human soldiers who trained for 16 hours a day and slept in mud. He wondered what these aliens would think about a human boot camp. They entered the main hall of the institute. It was filled with young Zephyrians who all looked eager and excited. Jake counted about 30 of them. They were sitting in neat rows, and their crystal skins sparkled in the soft light. One of them, a female with particularly bright coloring, seemed more interested than the others. "Students," Veltar announced, "meet our guests from Earth. They will show us how humans prepare for combat." The students clapped politely. Jake could see they were expecting some kind of demonstration with weapons or maybe a lecture about strategy. He looked at his team and saw they were thinking the same thing. "Before we begin," Jake said, "I should ask what you know about human military training." A young Zephyrian raised his hand. "We have heard that humans use primitive weapons and rely on brute force instead of skill." Another student added, "Our teachers told us that human warriors lack the grace and precision of proper combat techniques." The bright-colored female spoke up. "I am Zix Ara Brightblade. I have studied your history files. Humans seem to fight even when they are injured or outnumbered. How is this possible without pain-blocking technology?" Jake felt Kate stiffen beside him. The humans had not brought any special technology. They were planning to demonstrate basic training using nothing but their own bodies and simple equipment. "We don't use pain-blocking technology," Jake said simply. "Human soldiers learn to fight through pain and injury as part of their normal training." The room went quiet. Veltar looked confused. "Surely you jest?" "No civilized species would deliberately cause pain during training." Danny stepped forward. "Commander, maybe we should show them instead of trying to explain it." Jake nodded. "Sometimes the best way to teach was through demonstration. We brought some basic training equipment with us. Would it be okay if we set up in your practice area?" Veltar hesitated for a moment, but then agreed. The students followed them to a large room with polished floors and mirrored walls. It looked more like a dance studio than a place where warriors trained for battle. Alex and Danny began unpacking their equipment. They pulled out coils of barbed wire, wooden barriers, ropes, and weights. The Zephyrian students gathered around, touching the rough materials with wonder. They had never seen training gear that was designed to cause discomfort. "These items look quite dangerous," Veltar observed. "Surely these are replicas or ceremonial pieces." Kate picked up a section of barbed wire and ran her finger along one of the sharp points. A small drop of blood appeared on her skin. The Zephyrian students gasped and stepped back. "It's real," she said calmly, wiping the blood away. "All of our training equipment is designed to simulate combat conditions." Jake could see that the aliens were starting to realize this demonstration might be different from what they expected. The Zephyrians valued safety and precision above all else. The idea of training with dangerous equipment was completely foreign to them. "Perhaps we should start with something simple," Jake suggested. "We'll show you a basic obstacle course that human recruits complete on their first day of training." Zixara stepped closer to examine the barbed wire. "You mean new soldiers must touch these sharp points?" "They crawl under them," Danny said matter-of-factly. "Sometimes they get cut, but that's part of learning." The room fell silent again. Jake realized they were about to give these peaceful aliens the shock of their lives. Danny Rodriguez began setting up the obstacle course while the Zephyrian students watched with growing concern. He stretched the barbed wire between two posts, making sure it was low enough that someone would have to crawl underneath it. The sharp metal points glinted under the soft lights of the training room. "This is called a low crawl," Danny explained as he got down on his stomach. "The idea is to move forward using only your elbows and knees while staying below the wire." Veltar stepped closer, his crystal features showing worry. "Surely there must be a safe way to practice this technique before attempting it with actual barbed wire." Danny looked up from his position on the floor. "This is the safe way. On a real battlefield, there might be enemy fire above you too." The Zephyrian students exchanged nervous glances. Zixara moved to the front of the group, her bright coloring seeming to pulse with curiosity and fear. Danny began crawling forward. His uniform scraped against the floor and his breathing became heavier as he pulled himself along with his arms. About halfway through the course, his shoulder caught on one of the barbed wire points. The metal tore through his shirt and drew a line of blood across his skin. Several Zephyrian students cried out in alarm. One of them started to move forward to help, but Veltar held him back. Danny did not stop or even slow down. He continued crawling until he reached the end of the course, then stood up and brushed dirt off his clothes. "As you can see," Danny said, "minor cuts are normal. The important thing is to keep moving toward your objective." A young Zephyrian male raised his hand with a shaking arm. "Are you not in pain from that wound?" Danny looked down at the scratch on his shoulder. Blood was still seeping through his torn shirt. "Sure, it stings a little, but it's not serious enough to stop training." The concept seemed impossible for the aliens to understand. In their society, any injury during practice would immediately end the session. Medical care would be provided and the student would rest until completely healed. Jake decided to continue the demonstration. "Let's move on to wall climbing. This teaches soldiers how to get over barriers quickly." Alex had set up a wooden wall that was about 8 feet tall. It had no handholds or ropes, just a flat surface that required pure arm and leg strength to climb. The technique is simple, Alex explained. You run at the wall, jump as high as you can, and pull yourself up. He backed up about 10 feet from the wall, then sprinted forward and leaped. His hands caught the top edge, and he hauled himself up using only his arm muscles. The veins in his neck stood out from the effort and sweat beaded on his forehead. Your turn, Alex called down to the students. The Zephyrians looked at each other in confusion. Finally, one brave student stepped forward. He was taller than the others and seemed confident. He approached the wall carefully and tried to climb it like a ladder, looking for places to put his hands and feet. No, Kate said gently. You have to jump and grab the top. There's no other way up. The student tried twice but could not reach high enough. His third attempt was more desperate. He ran faster and jumped harder, but still fell short. When he hit the ground, he landed awkwardly and scraped his knee on the floor. Immediately, 3 other students rushed to help him. Veltar pulled out a small device that began scanning the injured student's leg. The wound is superficial but requires medical attention, Veltar announced. We must stop the training session. Jake held up his hand. Wait, let me show you how we handle minor injuries. In human training, he walked over to the fallen student and looked at the scraped knee. There was a small amount of blood, but no serious damage. Jake pulled a cloth from his pocket and wiped the wound clean. You're fine, Jake told the student. Try the wall again. The Zephyrian looked horrified. But I am injured. I cannot continue while wounded. It's just a scrape, Jake said. Human soldiers train with worse injuries all the time. To prove his point, Danny stepped forward and showed his shoulder where the barbed wire had cut him. The bleeding had stopped. But the wound was still visible. See, I got hurt 15 minutes ago, but I'm still training. The atmosphere in the room grew tense. The Zephyrian students were beginning to understand that human training methods were far more brutal than anything they had imagined. Kate decided to demonstrate hand-to-hand combat techniques. She and Alex moved to the center of the room and took fighting positions. Human soldiers learn to fight without weapons, Kate explained. This is called close combat or hand-to-hand fighting. She threw a punch at Alex's stomach. He blocked it, but the impact made a loud, smacking sound that echoed through the room. Alex responded with a kick toward Kate's leg. She caught his foot and twisted, causing him to stumble. The Zephyrian students watched in shock as the 2 humans struck each other repeatedly. Each blow was controlled but still delivered with enough force to cause pain. Kate landed an elbow strike to Alex's ribs that made him grunt and step back. Stop! Sixara cried out. You're hurting each other. Kate and Alex paused their sparring. Both were breathing hard and had red marks where they had been hit. That's the point, Kate said. If you can't handle getting hit in training, you won't survive in real combat. Alex rubbed his ribs where Kate's elbow had connected. In a few minutes, this will just be a bruise. Tomorrow it will be gone. But the skill I learned from taking that hit might save my life someday. Veltar stepped between the humans and his students. His crystal skin had turned a darker shade, which Jake guessed meant he was upset. This is barbaric, Veltar said quietly. Your species deliberately injures itself for training purposes. How is this different from torture? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jake looked at his team and saw they were all thinking the same thing. How could they explain to these peaceful aliens that pain was just another tool in human military training? Because we choose it, Jake said finally. Every human soldier volunteers for this training. We do it because we know that our enemies won't show us mercy in real combat. A young Zephyrian student who had been quiet until now raised his hand. But surely your species has developed ways to avoid pain during combat. Advanced medicine or mental techniques. Danny laughed, but it was not a happy sound. We have medicine for after the fight is over. During combat, pain is just something you ignore. The idea seemed to break something in the Zephyrian students. Understanding of the universe. Several of them sat down heavily, their crystal features showing expressions of shock and disbelief. Zixara was the only one who seemed to be handling the demonstration well. She stepped closer to the humans, her bright coloring pulsing with what looked like fascination rather than fear. You said this is basic training, she said. What does advanced training look like? Jake, Kate, Danny, and Alex all looked at each other. They had only shown the aliens the gentlest parts of human military conditioning. Boot camp, obstacle courses, and basic sparring were nothing compared to what Special Forces soldiers endured. Maybe we should take a break, Jake suggested. He could see that the Zephyrian students were already overwhelmed, and they had barely scratched the surface of human military training. Veltar called for a 30-minute break after watching the humans demonstrate basic combat training. He gathered the other Zephyrian instructors in a corner of the room and spoke to them in hushed tones. Jake could see them gesturing toward the humans and shaking their heads in disbelief. 3 Zephyrian medical technicians entered the room carrying scanning devices. They approached Danny first, pointing their instruments at the cut on his shoulder. The devices made soft beeping sounds and displayed symbols that Jake could not read. Fascinating, one of the technicians said. The human shows no signs of pain-blocking chemicals in his system. His neural pathways are fully active and processing the injury signals normally. Another technician scanned Alex's ribs where Kate had elbowed him during their sparring demonstration. This one has tissue damage consistent with blunt force trauma. Yet his stress hormones are at baseline levels. How is this possible? Kate stepped forward to answer. We train our minds as well as our bodies. Learning to function while injured is a basic skill for human soldiers? The medical technicians looked at each other with confusion. One of them pulled out a larger scanning device and aimed it at Kate. Would you consent to a full neural scan? We want to understand how your species processes pain. Sure, Kate said. With a shrug, the scanner hummed for several minutes while streams of data appeared on its screen. The technician operating it made small sounds of amazement as he read the results. Incredible, he whispered. Her pain receptors are completely normal, even hypersensitive compared to most species. Yet her brain has developed pathways that allow her to compartmentalize and ignore pain signals while maintaining full cognitive function. Veltar rejoined the group, his crystal features showing deep concern. Commander Morrison, we need to understand something. Are your people naturally immune to pain, or is this ability learned? Jake thought about how to explain human pain tolerance to aliens who had never experienced real hardship. It's learned. Human children feel pain just like anyone else. But through training and experience, we develop the ability to push through it. Push through it, Veltar repeated slowly. You mean you feel the pain but choose to ignore it? Exactly, Danny said. Pain is just information. It tells you something is wrong, but it doesn't have to stop you from completing your mission. A young Zephyrian student who had been listening carefully raised his hand. But why would you want to ignore your body's warning signals? Pain exists to protect you from further harm. Alex sat down on one of the training mats, still rubbing his sore ribs. Because sometimes completing the mission is more important than protecting yourself. If a human soldier stops fighting every time he gets hurt, his teammates might die. The concept of voluntary self-sacrifice for others seemed as alien to the Zephyrians as their peaceful nature seemed to the humans. Jake realized they needed to show the aliens more than just physical training. They needed to understand the mental conditioning that made human soldiers so effective. Let me demonstrate something different, Jake said. This is about training the mind to resist psychological pressure. He gestured for Kate to sit in a chair that Alex had placed in the center of the room. She settled into it comfortably and closed her eyes. In human military training, we prepare soldiers for the possibility of capture by enemy forces, Jake explained. This means learning to resist interrogation techniques designed to break down mental defenses. The Zephyrian students moved closer, intrigued by this new aspect of human training. Veltar looked nervous but did not object. Jake stood behind Kate's chair and began speaking in a loud, harsh voice. What is your unit's mission? How many soldiers are in your squad? Where are your weapons hidden? Kate remained silent, her breathing steady and her expression calm. Jake continued the mock interrogation, raising his voice and asking the same questions repeatedly. He paced around the chair, occasionally stopping directly in front of Kate to stare at her. After 10 minutes of this, she had not said a single word. "This is just the beginning," Jake told the stunned Zephyrian audience. "Real resistance training involves sleep deprivation, uncomfortable positions, temperature extremes, and psychological pressure that can last for days." Zixara stepped forward, her bright coloring now pulsing rapidly. "You mean human soldiers voluntarily submit to torture as part of their training?" The word torture made Jake uncomfortable. He had been through SEER school himself and knew it was not pleasant, but he had never thought of it as torture. "We call it resistance training," he said carefully. "The goal is to teach soldiers how to protect sensitive information even under extreme pressure." Danny decided to share his own experience. "I went through survival school where they dropped me in the wilderness with no food or water. I had to find my own shelter, catch animals to eat, and avoid capture teams for 5 days." "While you were being hunted by other humans?" Veltar asked in disbelief. "That's right," Danny confirmed. "The instructors used helicopters, dogs, and ground teams to track us down. If they caught you, the resistance training began." A Zephyrian medical technician who had been quiet during the demonstration finally spoke up. "What you described would be considered severe criminal abuse under galactic law. No civilized species subjects its own members to such treatment." The humans looked at each other awkwardly. They were beginning to realize just how different their culture was from the rest of the galaxy. Kate stood up from the chair and stretched. "The thing you have to understand is that we do this to protect each other. If I can resist interrogation for even a few hours, it might give my teammates time to escape or complete their mission." "But the psychological damage," Veltar protested. "Surely such experiences leave permanent trauma." Alex shook his head. "Most soldiers come through it fine. The training is carefully controlled and we have medical support throughout. The point is not to break people but to make them stronger." Jake decided to explain the broader context of human military philosophy. "On Earth we have a saying, train hard, fight easy. The idea is that if your training is more difficult than actual combat, you'll be prepared for anything." "More difficult than combat?" a student asked. "How is that possible?" Danny grinned. "Because in training, we're not trying to kill each other. We can push people to their absolute limits without permanent damage. In real combat, the enemy is trying to kill you, so you don't have the luxury of gradual conditioning." The room fell silent as the Zephyrians tried to process this information. Their entire approach to conflict was based on minimizing harm and following strict rules. The idea that beings would voluntarily endure extreme hardship to prepare for war was completely outside their experience. Zixara was the first to speak. "How many human soldiers died during this training?" The question caught Jake off guard. He had expected them to ask about injuries or psychological effects, not deaths. "Training accidents happen," he admitted. "But they're rare. Maybe 1 or 2 deaths per 1,000 students." The number hit the Zephyrian students like a physical blow. Several of them sat down heavily and one actually fainted. In their society, even a single training death would shut down a program permanently. Veltar's crystal skin had turned almost black with distress. "You accept the deaths of your own people as the cost of military training?" Jake felt defensive but tried to keep his voice calm. "We accept that preparing for war involves risk. The alternative is sending unprepared soldiers into combat, where many more would die." The logic was sound from a human perspective, but Jake could see it made no sense to the peaceful Zephyrians. They lived in a galaxy where conflicts were resolved through negotiation and ritual combat. The idea of total war, where entire species fought for survival, was beyond their understanding. After another brief consultation with his fellow instructors, Veltar reluctantly agreed to continue the demonstration. Half of the Zephyrian students had already left the room, unable to handle what they had witnessed. The remaining 15 sat in stunned silence, their crystal features reflecting their internal struggle to understand human military culture. Jake decided to focus on tactical concepts rather than more physical demonstrations. He hoped this might be easier for the aliens to accept, but he was wrong. "Let's talk about how human soldiers work together in combat," Jake began. We call it unit tactics. He gestured for his team to spread out across the training room. Imagine we're a squad moving through enemy territory. Our mission is to reach that wall over there, but there are hostile forces trying to stop us. The Zephyrian students perked up with interest. This sounded more like the strategic games they were familiar with. The problem is that the enemy has weapons pointed at the open ground we need to cross, Jake continued. In human military doctrine, we solve this through a technique called fire and movement. Danny took position behind one of the training obstacles. I'll provide covering fire while the others move forward. My job is to keep the enemy's attention focused on me so they can't shoot at my teammates. Kate, Alex, and Jake spread out and prepared to run across the open space. Wait, Zixara interrupted. You said the enemy weapons are pointed at the open ground. Why would you deliberately draw their attention? Won't that get you killed? Danny nodded. Maybe, but if I don't draw their fire, all 4 of us will probably die. This way, 3 of us have a good chance of making it. The mathematical logic of sacrificing 1 life to save 3 was something the Zephyrians could understand intellectually, but the emotional reality was horrifying to them. Surely there must be a safer alternative, Veltar said. Could you not find another route or wait for a better opportunity? Jake shook his head. Sometimes there is no safer alternative. Sometimes the mission is more important than individual survival. To demonstrate the concept, the humans acted out a mock assault. Danny positioned himself where he could see the imaginary enemy and began calling out covering fire commands. Kate, Alex, and Jake sprinted across the open ground in short rushes, diving behind cover whenever Danny signaled that enemy fire was getting too close. The Zephyrian students watched in fascination and horror as the humans threw themselves too. The ground rolled behind obstacles and popped up to continue their advance. The level of coordination required was impressive, but the casual acceptance of mortal danger was deeply disturbing. In real combat, Alex explained between rushes, we would actually be shooting at the enemy while moving. The person providing cover fire might be taking incoming rounds the whole time. A young Zephyrian male raised his hand tentatively. How do you decide who takes the most dangerous position? Usually the most experienced soldier, Kate answered. Someone who has the best chance of surviving while still doing the job effectively. But that means your most valuable warriors are at the highest risk. Veltar observed. Jake paused the demonstration to address this point. In human culture, the most experienced warriors have a responsibility to protect the younger ones. We consider it an honor to take the dangerous position. The concept of honor in the face of death was something the Zephyrians struggled to grasp. Their society valued life above all else, and the idea of seeking dangerous situations for glory seemed like madness. Danny decided to explain the broader strategic picture. The thing is, one experienced soldier drawing enemy fire might save 10 new soldiers. Over time, this keeps more people alive. But what if the experienced soldier dies? A student asked. Then the mission continues, Danny said simply. Human. Military units are trained to keep fighting even after losing their leaders. Kate began describing the chain of command structure that allowed human forces to function despite casualties. If the squad leader dies, the second in command takes over. If he dies, the next most senior soldier leads. We plan for leadership casualties as a normal part of operations. The Zephyrian students were beginning to understand that human military doctrine was built around the assumption that people would die. Every tactic, every strategy, every piece of equipment was designed with acceptable losses in mind. How do you calculate these acceptable losses? Zixara asked with morbid curiosity. Alex looked uncomfortable with the question but answered, honestly, it depends on the mission. If we're trying to capture a bridge that will save thousands of lives, we might accept 50% casualties. If it's just a patrol, we would call for help rather than take heavy losses. The idea that human commanders would knowingly send soldiers to their deaths as part of a calculated strategy was the most shocking revelation yet. Veltar's crystal skin had turned so dark it was almost black. You speak of your people as expendable resources, he said quietly. How is this different from slavery? Jake felt anger rising in his chest but forced himself to remain calm. Because we volunteer, every human soldier chooses to serve. We understand the risks and accept them. But why would anyone make such a choice? A student asked. The question got to the heart of what made humans different from other species. Jake thought about his own reasons for joining the military and those of the countless soldiers he had known over the years. Because someone has to, he said finally. If we don't fight to protect our families and our way of life, who will? Sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and chaos is a soldier willing to die for something greater than himself. Danny nodded in agreement. My grandfather fought in 3 wars. He used to tell me that the price of peace is eternal vigilance. Someone has to be ready to pay that price. The Zephyrians sat in stunned silence as they tried to process this philosophy. In their experience, conflicts were resolved through negotiation and compromise. The idea that some enemies could only be stopped through violence was foreign to them. Kate decided to explain the concept of total war, where entire civilizations fought for survival. Humans have faced extinction several times in our history. We've learned that when your species is threatened, individual sacrifice becomes necessary for group survival. What kind of threats? Veltar asked. Other human nations mostly, Alex admitted. We've spent most of our history fighting each other, natural disasters, disease, famine. Our planet has tried to kill us in every way imaginable. Jake could see the Zephyrians trying to imagine a world so dangerous that its inhabitants would develop such extreme survival instincts. Their own planet was peaceful and abundant, with few natural dangers and no history of warfare. That's why our training is so harsh, Jake continued. We're not just preparing for organized armies with rules and honor codes. We're preparing for enemies who want to wipe us out completely. Zixara leaned forward, her bright coloring pulsing with intense curiosity. Have humans ever faced such enemies? The 4 humans looked at each other grimly. They were thinking about the same periods in Earth's history, the world wars, genocides and conflicts where surrender was not an option. Yes, Jake said quietly. And we learned that when your enemy shows no mercy, you can't afford to show weakness. That's why we train the way we do. The training room fell silent except for the soft humming of Zephyrian technology. The alien. Students were beginning to understand that humans were not just another peaceful species with unusual customs. They were survivors of a harsh world who had turned suffering into strength and death into strategy. The demonstration had been going on for 3 hours, and Jake could see that the remaining Zephyrian students were reaching their breaking point. Their crystal features showed signs of emotional exhaustion, and several were trembling slightly. Even Zixara, who had shown the most resilience, looked shaken by what she had witnessed. Veltar approached Jake with careful steps, as if he were afraid of what he might learn next. Commander Morrison, I must ask you something that troubles me deeply. Everything you have shown us today, you described as basic training. What do your advanced soldiers endure? Jake hesitated. He had been dreading this question because he knew the answer would probably end the cultural exchange program permanently. But the Zephyrians deserved honesty. What we've shown you today is what every human soldier learns, Jake said slowly. It's the foundation that prepares them for more specialized training. More specialized how? Veltar pressed. Kate stepped forward to help explain. Different types of soldiers require different skills. Infantry soldiers, pilots, special forces, engineers. Each has additional training beyond what you've seen. Tell us about special forces, Zixara said. Though her voice was barely above a whisper, Danny and Alex exchanged glances. Both had friends who had gone through special forces training, and they knew it made regular boot camp look like a vacation. Special forces soldiers are trained for missions behind enemy lines, Danny explained. They might have to survive alone in hostile territory for weeks or months. The selection process eliminates about 90% of candidates, Alex added. Not because they're weak, but because the training is designed to find people who can function under extreme stress. A young Zephyrian student who had been quiet throughout the demonstration finally spoke up. What does this training involve? Jake took a deep breath before answering. Prolonged physical exercise while carrying heavy equipment. Sleep deprivation. That can last for days. Navigation through dangerous terrain in all weather conditions. Simulated torture during capture scenarios. How long does this training last? Valtar asked. Months, Kate replied. Sometimes over a year, depending on the specialization. The Zephyrian medical technician who had been scanning the humans earlier pulled out his device again. May I ask? What physical changes occur in humans who complete this training? Sure, Jake said, rolling up his sleeve to expose old scars on his forearm. Most of us have permanent injuries from training. Broken bones that healed, torn muscles, joint damage from carrying heavy loads. The scanner beeped as it analyzed Jake's arm. Fascinating. I can see evidence of multiple fractures all healed without medical intervention. How did you function with broken bones? You learn to work around injuries, Jake said with a shrug. A broken finger won't kill you, so you tape it up and keep going. A sprained ankle slows you down, but it won't stop you from completing the mission. Zixara stood up abruptly, her crystal skin now flickering between different colors rapidly. I need to understand something. Why do humans choose to endure such treatment? What could possibly motivate someone to volunteer for torture? The question hit at the core of human nature, and Jake struggled to find words that would make sense to these peaceful aliens. Because the alternative is worse, he said finally. If we're not prepared for the worst possible situations, we might fail when our people need us most. Danny decided to share a personal story. My unit was deployed to a disaster zone where an earthquake had destroyed most of a city. We worked for 72 hours straight, pulling survivors from collapsed buildings. We hadn't slept, had barely eaten, and several of us were injured from falling debris. That sounds terrible, a Zephyrian student said. It was, Danny agreed. But because of our training, we were able to save over 200 people. If we had quit when we got tired or hurt, those people would have died. The concept of finding meaning in suffering was something the Zephyrians could not grasp. Their culture valued comfort and safety above all else. The idea that hardship could forge character was completely alien to them. Veltar sat down heavily, his crystal features showing defeat. I think I am beginning to understand why the Galactic Council considers humans so formidable in combat. Your species has weaponized suffering itself. Kate nodded slowly. In a way, yes. We've learned to turn pain and hardship into tactical advantages. But at what cost? Veltar asked. How many of your people are permanently damaged by this training? Alex considered the question carefully. Some soldiers struggle with injuries or psychological issues after their service, but most adapt and go on to live normal lives. The skills they learned in the military often help them succeed in civilian careers, and they consider the sacrifice worthwhile, a student asked. Most do, Jake confirmed. Human soldiers are proud of what they've accomplished. They know their service protected people who couldn't protect themselves. Zixara approached the group of humans, her coloring now steady but much dimmer than before. One final question. You said humans developed these capabilities because your world was dangerous. What made Earth so hostile? The four humans looked at each other, realizing they were about to explain the harsh reality of their home planet to beings who had never experienced real hardship. Everything, Kate said simply. The climate, the geography, the other species, and especially other humans, Jake elaborated. Earth has ice ages that last thousands of years, volcanoes that can change the global climate, storms that destroy entire coastlines. The planet itself is constantly trying to kill us. And before we developed civilization, Danny added, we competed with predators that were bigger, faster, and stronger than us. Humans survived by being smarter and more persistent than everything else. Most importantly, Alex concluded, we've spent most of our history fighting each other. Every generation of humans has faced some form of warfare. It shaped our entire culture. The room fell silent as the Zephyrians tried to imagine. 4 billion years of evolution on a world where only the strongest and most adaptable survived. Their own planet had been peaceful for so long that they had forgotten what survival pressure felt like. Veltar finally stood up and addressed his remaining students. I think we have learned enough for today, perhaps for several lifetimes. He turned to the humans with something that might have been respect mixed with fear. Commander Morrison, your demonstration has been most educational. We now understand why the Galactic Council speaks of humans with such wariness. Jake felt a pang of regret. They had come here hoping to build bridges between species, but instead they had probably frightened these peaceful people. We didn't mean to upset anyone, he said. We just wanted to share our culture. Zixara stepped forward one last time. You have given us much to think about. We always wondered how humans became such effective warriors despite having no natural weapons or armor. Now we understand that you forged yourselves into weapons through will and suffering. Her words hung in the air as the Zephyrian students filed out of the training room. Most of them avoided looking at the humans directly, as if they were afraid of what they might see. Veltar was the last to leave. He paused at the door and looked back at the 4 humans who were packing up their equipment. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I am grateful that your species considers us allies rather than enemies. After the Zephyrians left, the 4 humans stood alone in the crystal training room. They had successfully demonstrated human military training methods, but Jake wasn't sure if that was a good thing. Think they'll still want to do cultural exchanges with Earth? Kate asked. Danny laughed, but it was a tired sound. Probably not. We just scared the hell out of the most peaceful species in the galaxy. Jake looked around at the pristine training facility with its soft lighting and polished floors. It was beautiful, but it could never produce warriors capable of the kind of sacrifice human soldiers took for granted. Maybe that's not a bad thing, he said. Let them stay peaceful. The galaxy is a better place with species like the Zephyrians in it. As they prepared to return to Earth, none of the humans realized they had just created a fundamental shift in how the galactic community viewed humanity. Word of their demonstration would spread, and soon every species in the galaxy would know that humans were not just another member race. They were survivors of a harsh world who had learned to transform suffering into strength, and that made them both invaluable allies and terrifying potential enemies.